Hi, everyone. Welcome to Being Patient Perspectives. I'm Deborah Kan, founder of Being Patient. Today we have with us Judy Johanson. She lost her husband, Steve, to early onset Alzheimer's last year, but has a very important role at Mass Gen Hospital as a clinical research ambassador, helping families who have been impacted by Alzheimer's. Judy, we're so glad to have you with us today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Deborah. I'm happy to be here.
Let's start first with Steve's journey with Alzheimer's. He passed away last April, sadly, after a 6-year battle with early onset. Can you tell us a little bit about his experience with Alzheimer's?
Sure. Just to start off, Steve was a construction project manager for special projects at Northeastern University and managing very detailed projects up to $20 million. And he came home from work in May of 2011, and said he had received a poor performance review. So that set us out on trying to get answers about what was going on. His mother currently was living with Alzheimer's, and it was his worst fear that he would travel that same road. And 5.5 months of testing led us to a diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's right before his 59th birthday. We decided to dig in and become engaged anywhere we could. We sought resources from the Alzheimer's Association. We used our voices to advocate on both state and federal levels. We became socially engaged with other people who were on the same path, and just decided to make the most of it. And we had a really great time for about 4 years, and then things started getting a lot tougher for him. And we recalibrated our compass and had as good of a time as we could during those times. And then he just kind of went down fast and hard in the end. So
I want to talk a little bit about, I can't tell you how many people say, of people we speak to, that it's always the job performance. It's that really makes them stop and pause, like, is something wrong? Their performance slips. I've had it described to me a bit like an ADD symptom, like you can't focus, and so your productivity goes down. Tell us a little bit more about what it was like for Steve at Northeastern. I imagine, working for a big university, he had a lot of responsibilities on him. So what was it that when he came home and said, I got a bad performance review, what was it that they were noticing?
They were noticing follow through, that he wasn't following through with things. And, he used to say to me, I'm concerned. And I'd say, mention to your PCP when you have your visit that you're concerned about your memory. And the PCP would joke and say, that's just marriage, and all these things that weren't true for us. But when work noticed that he was not following through with details that he used to be very detail oriented on, and then even he realized one time he did a complex financial report at the end of a project, went in and laid it on his boss's desk and laid it on top of the identical report he had already done and had no recollection of. So
it's and then you said, you had about 4 good years and things really started to slide. What exactly happened with Steve?
When he started to slide?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So it was about this time 2 years ago, August of 2017. And, physically, he was a little bit slower than he was, but we were still able to, do as much as we could. But what was happening was hallucinations were coming into play. And when hallucinations come into play and your surroundings or the people you know and love don't look like the people you know and love, or the home that you feel safe in, you can respond in a defensive manner. And this made him agitated because he was such a loving man. For him not to feel comfortable was really, really hard for him, you could tell. So we started, his neurologist had been very stringent with antipsychotic meds, thank goodness. But at that point, we started with antipsychotic meds. And those just aren't always the answer, because on the tail end of the dose, you can actually become more agitated and more uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
So we tried to manage that, for a couple of months. And my children and my kids were unbelievable. Sometimes they would just come in and play music for him or hold his hands and sing him to sleep or whatever. Um, and then October 21st of 2017, the symptoms really, he had a day that there was nothing that we could do to calm his symptoms. And his neurologist suggested that we take him to the ER. And because he needed to get into a Jerry psych. And for people who don't know that, I don't know if it's the same everywhere, but in Massachusetts, you have to go through an ER to get into a Jerry psych unit to have your meds adjusted. And the ER currently is not any place for someone with dementia.
So when you say the ER is not a place, is it because the staff don't know, they don't understand what's going on inside the brain, so they don't know how to deal with the emotional side? Like, what exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it was hard to deal with the person who knew him best, me, for 38 years. So I don't expect medical professionals to have an understanding of him as soon as we go in. But with Alzheimer's being the sixth leading cause of death, you would expect better dementia training. When I go in and say he has Alzheimer's and triage nurse says 3 times, open your mouth so I can take your temperature, open your mouth. I'm like, that is not going to work for him. Or putting us in a room for 6 hours with no one coming in. And, I had not brought his anti-psych medication with me. I had not brought food with me, all these things. And then when his hallucinations took hold and he got aggressive, I needed to call for help. And even though they knew he had Alzheimer's, he was tackled and restrained and screamed at. And it was horrific. And these people were nice people. They were caring people. They were medical professionals. But I think what's not understood is what late stage Alzheimer's looks like and what a hallucinogenic state looks like and how to deal with that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it is such a common thing with people who suffer from Alzheimer's, hallucinations. I mean, we're seeing it with my mom, and it is really a worrisome in the sense that more and more people are getting Alzheimer's, and this is obviously going to be a problem for many people to come if it's not already. So, what is the answer? Do we need to better train people about the management of a later stage of disease? And I think this segues nicely into the work that you're doing today, in helping medical professionals really understand how to best treat people who have Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there definitely needs to be more education around dementia. Again, like I said, with it being the sixth leading cause of death, why isn't it? There's a hush and a whisper about dementia and Alzheimer's, and because people are afraid of it. It's an unknown entity that lives within this body. When someone has cancer or heart disease, we can see what the ailment is, and we can see treatments or how not to treat it. But with Alzheimer's, it's very hard to know how to do that. In Massachusetts, we have just passed a law last summer that will require every medical official a medical person to be trained with dementia training before 2021. And every hospital has to implement an operational plan on how to deal with people with dementia. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to have in writing. But how to implement this is proving to be a little bit of a challenge. And in Massachusetts, we have set up a permanent advisory council that is meeting quarterly to try to advise people on how to advance this law and put it into practice. Again, it's not easy, but the more we talk about it, the more. I haven't met one medical professional yet who has said, this is a bad idea. It's a great idea. How can we do it?
Absolutely. And we're getting, somebody is making a comment now saying, as she listens to this broadcast, that her mom's in 2 weeks of a crying stage. And I just want to point out that people write to us all the time about different symptoms that they are trying to manage, at home. And you realize that, although there's a lot of similarities in the patterns of Alzheimer's, there's very distinct symptoms sometimes that are unique to the person. So I imagine that makes it difficult in terms of having one set of rules for all Alzheimer's patients.
Exactly. There's no straight arrow to deal with this. And I think just talking about it, I mean, first off, I'm so sorry for that woman that she's going through this crying stage with her mother. I can only imagine how heartbreaking that must be. And yeah, and there's a little video online you can find that shows that we are just out of control of our emotions when we reach a certain stage. And sometimes the crying or laughing is not even specific to something happy or sad. And sometimes that would help me if Steve seemed, weepy, to think, okay, try, he's not realizing that everything is sad. This is just a physical manifestation of his disease, and try to carry on with what we were doing in the moment.
So is in terms of managing these behaviors, like we had a gentleman write into us this past week saying his wife is obsessive with feeling like things aren't clean. So they're constantly washing things and putting them in the dryer to show her they are clean. I thought that was so, I mean, they were probably exhausted from, having to clean everything that she touched or that she puts on. But, do you find, as you advise people who you see at Mass Gen, people who are relatives or caregivers, is it better to distract, or is it better to just create whatever moment they're in as a reality, like live in it and acknowledge it? What's the right direction?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. And again, that's as individual as the individual is himself and as the moment is. There were times when you would try to redirect, and then times that you would go with it. I would often have Steve say, okay, come on, let's go home. And I say, all right, give me 15 minutes and I'll gather everything, catch our breath, and then we'll go. So that was a little bit of working with him and redirecting. And what I always like to say to people too, I don't really have advice for people. I can only tell you the things that worked for us. And sometimes that might work for other people. Sometimes it might not. One day Steve said, and I mean, our life was providing him with the best care he could have because he so deserved it, because he provided us with the best life we could have. And he just looked at my daughter and I one day and he said, all I want is one decent pair of pants. And, I had 10 pairs of pants, but we just said, wow, yeah, you deserve that. Let's make that happen. So little things like that. And little things can become obsessive. He liked to have something in his pocket that he could feel. Well, give him something in his pocket. Just let him,
Right.
try to meet people wherever they are. And that can change from day to day.
Yeah, that's a really important point to
Yeah.
make. We're getting a lot of questions and comments right now. There's one viewer is saying it all seems worse, much worse symptoms with a UTI, a urinary tract infection, of course. We can't get the doctor to help keep this under control. They just don't understand how much worse it makes the symptoms. Have you come across that with any people you speak to?
Yes, yeah. Fortunately, Steve never had a UTI, but his mother dealt with that, and I hear of other people very often having that. And keeping up on that is hard, and it can make the caregiver crazy because it's not an open wound that you can see and know that it's approaching and coming on. So sometimes it's full blown before you realize. Um, that they have a UTI and what havoc it can wreak on a patient. I mean, if the doctor is not working with you on that, I would maybe seek another doctor or make sure you get your social worker involved. That's the other thing that's becoming really, really evident is that social workers and resource specialists are almost just as vital as your neurologist and your PCP. PCPs in general are not as educated about Alzheimer's and other related dementias. I think that is all on the verge of changing, but right now they just may not even get, even though they're an MD, how vital it is to treat a UTI and to lay out a plan to try to avoid future UTIs. I think there should be a whole nutritional plan set up with patients with Alzheimer's and other related dementias, because if you can work and lay out a meal schedule that helps them void when times are convenient, that helps them be regular with their bowel movements, you can save a lot of trouble on the caregiver and a lot of wear and tear. And I'd like to see MDs incorporate that into plans also. And that
So,
could, it's a vicious cycle with the UTI.
yeah, absolutely. We've heard that many, many times. But Judy, how do you work with the healthcare professionals at Mass Gen? I mean, obviously, Mass Gen is unique in the sense that they have care ambassadors, people like yourself who've lived through this disease and can offer a clear, fresh perspective on what medical professionals, what healthcare providers should be aware of. But how do you work with them? And what are some of the effects that you're seeing from increased communication?
Sure. I mean, I'm so fortunate that Steve's neurologist had the vision that she did of bringing me on board afterwards. And she said, listen, if you could cover some areas, let's think about your strengths that you had along this journey. And those were being engaged in the community, talking about this disease publicly and best ways to strategize, explaining to people the legacy that we were able to create by being involved in research and the cathartic values of that in our family and for Steve. So, what I get to do in my job, I get to be at clinic on Mondays and sit at the research recruitment table and meet with people who are just willing to ask the question, is research right for me? And that's a very personal question, and we never try to persuade anyone either way, but we listen to them and we listen to where they're coming from, and then we pass their information on to the doctors and ask them to suggest trials. We have observational and clinical trials and a brain donation program at Mass General that, sometimes it fits right in. I had a beautiful older woman yesterday say to me, I know that research might not do anything for me, but I want to help others. And to be able to meet with people and give them a space to say that is really a blessing in my life. And then I get to work.
Sorry, go ahead.
There's a new dementia care collaborative working under the geriatric and palliative care department at Mass General. And they have linked in through the social workers into the memory division unit, and trying to carry a continuum of that kind of care from the social work side into the research side, again, to treat the full patient and the caregiver. And we're trying to just make a more supportive atmosphere for the caregiver and the patient, and know that visits to the hospital don't just have to be miserable clinical cold events. And I had a doctor in the clinic yesterday come to the table at the end of the day, and he was introducing me to a colleague who's there for the summer. And he said, having people like Judy here pulls us back down to earth. He said, we get involved in our research heads and our numbers. He said, but to remember the personal side helps us. And he also even said the power of holding a patient's brain in his hand postpartum is just, so I really loved it that he sees it that way. And I think that's so much what's happening at Mass General, that I got to really see the excellent clinical care that Steve received, and now I get to support them in whatever ways I can while I'm there.
We have someone who has written in saying, does the fact my mom had this make me more susceptible? Now, that's a question that comes up over and over again, and we find, if you are genetically predisposed, there is often more of a willingness to go into clinical trials. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, Judy, do you want to provide an answer to that question? I know Steve had his mother had Alzheimer's. Is that correct?
Yep, and she
Well,
she actually had it for 13 years. She just passed away in May, and his father is on hospice now with Alzheimer's.
so he had
Um,
two. Did he ever get genetically tested for the APOE4 gene?
because we were trying to get into a trial one time, he had to be tested for that, and we were told he did have the APOE4 gene. Now I don't know whether he carried the two of them, but he didn't have a genetic mutation, and I know that because of post mortem autopsy. And it's a very, very personal thing to decide to get tested or not. But I'd say if you're asking the question and the question is nagging at you, then talk to your doctor about it. And you know, talk to what I love to say too is the Alzheimer's Association has a 24/7 helpline, and people have the idea that it only needs to be used in a catastrophic moment. But you can call that for any question, and they can direct you towards resources for asking these questions. Um, supposedly Steve's Alzheimer's is not connected to his parents because his parents got it later in life.
Mhm.
So,
So, another viewer is making a comment, which is so true, saying rural healthcare is different from the city, and that's so absolutely true. If you are in a place like Boston or San Francisco, you're going to have many more care resources available to you than if you are somewhere in a rural area. And that in itself can determine the level of care and what type of questions you're getting answered, like whether the doctor is experienced or not.
yeah.
Is that not the case?
I mean, from my little knowledge and what I have heard from people across the country, yes, it is the case. And again, there's that 24/7 helpline that can connect you, across the country, wherever you are, with information. But in places where the care is less than advantageous, my only suggestion would be to keep educating yourself as a caregiver. And if you have internet connection, if you can listen to Deborah and her interviews, then you will become a better advocate for your loved one, and maybe be able to navigate even in rural areas. And having backup information when you go into doctors really does help. It's not an okay thing for a doctor to say anymore, oh, she's just mildly forgetful. Why? I mean, 45% of people with Alzheimer's don't know of their diagnosis. That's not acceptable.
Yeah.
Everyone deserves to know.
If we've learned anything on this journey, it's twofold. One is you don't have to accept, if you go to one doctor and you're not happy with the type of answers you're getting, seek another one, right? We hear that. I mean, one person's perspective is not necessarily the right one for you. And yes, one of the things that we're trying to do at Being Patient is give people who are in areas where they don't have access to the experts. We're bringing the experts to our platform to give them a connection to people no matter where you are. So hopefully we can succeed in that. And I will say, we're doing a good job if we're only doing that, even though we're
Yeah,
trying to do more things.
yeah, yeah.
So Mike Bellevue, who's a friend of ours who
Oh,
we interviewed, he said he's just made a comment saying, Judy, can you talk a little about Steve's attitude and the way he carried himself each and every day?
sure, I can. And while I do that, I will hold up a painting that Mike did for his dear friend Steve, that is a quote that Steve had lived by. I don't know if you can see it. Let's see. Can you see that?
Hold it a little bit higher. Yeah, in fact, yeah.
So, what I say about Steve is Steve took simple ideas, trials, and tribulations, and always made the most out of them. I like to recall that, one time a big, long log rolled into the beach and kind of took up an area where our kids would have swim. Well, Steve rolled it out of the water. He put a rock underneath it and made a seesaw out of it for the kids. He stood on it and challenged them to keep their balance on it in the water. They floated in the water. Then they rolled it out of the water and sat on it and had lunch on it. He loved to sail his catamaran. And most people who are into catamaran sailing, if the wind dies, that's the end of their day and their attitude. Well, Steve would consider that a gift. He'd drop the sails and he'd say to the kids, lay down and look down into the water. We can see things that you can never see from the shore. So this was his view and approach to Alzheimer's also. When he was first diagnosed, he said, we have two choices. We can be happy or we can be sad. And we have love, and Alzheimer's will never take that. So we're going to take the happy road. And that's what we tried to do. We made the most. He got involved with anything he could. I mean, when the doctor asked him if he'd be interested in donating his brain post-mortem, he said, that is a no-brainer. Take it. But he realized he would not be here to teach the kids how to climb mountains and to sail. So he wanted to do other things that would create a legacy for them, to know that their grandfather lived and made an impact on this world. And we used to say in the morning, because I stopped working a couple years into his diagnosis because we decided to just spend this time together. We used to say in the morning, we don't like Alzheimer's, but we sure love lingering over a cup of coffee together every day. And someone had said to us in France one time when we were there, time is not my problem. So we would say that on our days off together. Time is not our problem. We're going to spend it and enjoy every moment of it together.
That's wonderful. What a wonderful way to live and to look at life. And I'm sure it did make those final years better, with an attitude like that. I think that's incredible. What an incredible person.
It really, it helped because, another story that I like to tell is one shovel load at a time. Steve always removed the snow from our front of our house when we'd get a storm. One time we had an enormous storm and his back was out and he couldn't do it. And I went out and looked at it and I came back and I said, it's a mountain of snow. The plows had pushed it all in front of our house. And I said, I can't do it. And he said, can you move one shovel load? And I said, yeah, I can do one shovel load. And he said, well, chances are, if you focus on that one shovel load and move it, you'll be able to do another, and then another, and another. And he was right. It took me hours, but if I can do today. And if caregivers can think about that, if you can make it through today, if everybody's fed and dressed, showers are a bonus, I used to say to him at the end of the day, we have 100% success rate so far for getting through the day. So no reason to believe tomorrow will be different. And if it is, we'll deal with it then.
That's a great, great outlook. And thank you so much for sharing that with us. And kudos to all of the work that you're doing at MassGen. It's so important for so many people. We're really so happy that you can join us for this half an hour and share your experience and Steve's remarkable journey with Alzheimer's, and really a great example of an attitude that really helps you persevere and not give up, even though you have this disease. So he's a great example and a great legacy to live and aspire to live like. So thank you, Judy. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you. And
how do people reach out to you if they have questions? I mean, you can always leave messages on our Facebook page, but is there a direct resource within MassGen where people can find you?
Well, I mean, I have an email address at Mass General that they could reach out to.
We can post.
Okay.
Yeah, we can put that
okay, great.
on
Then people message me on Facebook at times or Instagram or but I just one of the things that really is such an effect with Alzheimer's is connection and connectivity and the connections you lose along the way. So any way that we can remain connected and make new connections is a gift and a vital source of sustenance on this journey. So I always encourage fellow caregivers and people living with the disease to connect with each other, connect with me, connect with the universe, connect with God, whatever. Don't, try to maintain connections.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you for your time and your wisdom and knowledge and sharing with us. Oops, I think I've lost the picture there.
I know.
Anyway, just in time, we can see you, but for some reason my picture's just gone out. But anyway,
Okay.
thank you for your time. As always, we will post these interviews on beingpatient.com. If you've missed part of it or you want to see more, please check our website, and the interview with Judy in the entirety will be posted there. So thanks very much for joining us, and we look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks so much, Deborah. Thanks for all you're doing.